This is Behind the Verdict. I'm John Horford with Myron Cook, and today we're going to talk about the Scott and Laci Peterson case. Scott and Laci Peterson were a seemingly happy young married couple from Modesto, California. They met in college at California Polytechnic State University and married in 1997. By 2002, Laci was 8 months pregnant with their first child, whom they planned to name Connor. Laci was described as warm and friendly, and she was excited about becoming a new mother. Scott worked as a fertilizer salesman, and the couple lived a comfortable middle-class life.
On Christmas Eve 2002, Scott Peterson reported his wife missing. His account of the day was as follows. Laci had planned to walk their dog, a golden retriever named Mackenzie, in the morning. Scott claimed he went fishing at the Berkeley Marina about 90 miles away, and when he returned home, Laci was gone. The family dog was found wandering the neighborhood with its leash still attached, but there was no sign of Laci. Laci's family was immediately worried because she was heavily pregnant and wouldn't have just vanished. The Modesto Police Department launched a search, and the case quickly gained national media attention.
In the early days, Scott pretended to be a concerned husband, participating in press conferences and cooperating with police. However, investigators and the public became suspicious of his behavior for several reasons. His fishing trip seemed odd since he had just bought a boat days before Laci disappeared, and no one in his family even knew about it. Many found Scott's demeanor strangely unemotional for a man whose pregnant wife was missing. In January 2003, a massage therapist named Amber Fry came forward, revealing that she had been dating Scott for a month before Laci disappeared. Scott had lied to her, claiming he was a widower whose wife had died. The police had Amber secretly record phone calls with Scott, which revealed his deception. On New Year's Eve 2002, while Laci was still missing, Scott called Amber from a vigil for Laci, pretending to be in Paris. These revelations shattered Scott's credibility and convinced many that he was involved in Laci's disappearance.
4 months, police searched the Berkeley Marina based on Scott's alibi. Then in April 2003, the case took a tragic turn. On April 13th, 2003, a couple walking near the San Francisco Bay discovered a decomposed male fetus that had washed ashore. The umbilical cord was still attached. The very next day, on April 14th, 2003, authorities found the partial remains of an adult female nearby. The body was missing the head, the hands, most internal organs, and the lower parts of the legs. All of that was likely due to decomposition in the water, or so they thought. DNA testing confirmed that these remains were indeed Laci Peterson and her unborn son, Connor.
4 days later, police arrested Scott Peterson in San Diego, where his parents lived. His appearance and the items found in his car raised more red flags. He had dyed his hair blonde, he was carrying $15,000 in cash, multiple cell phones, and camping gear. He had his brother's driver's license, leading police to suspect he was planning to flee to Mexico. By this point, public opinion had fully turned against Scott, and the authorities charged him with 2 counts of murder, one for Laci and one for Connor.
Scott's high-profile trial began in June 2004 in Redwood City, California, after being moved from the Modesto area due to intense publicity. The prosecution, led by Rick DiStazo, presented the following key arguments: that Scott murdered Laci at their home on the night of the 23rd or early December 24th. He transported her body to the Berkeley Marina and dumped her in the bay. His affair with Amber Fry was his motive. He wanted freedom, and he did not want a child. A single hair matching Laci's was found in Scott's boat. His fishing alibi was suspicious, as he had never fished at that location before. Scott's defense attorney, Mark Garagos, argued there was no direct physical evidence linking Scott to Laci's murder, that Laci may have been abducted by unknown individuals. The prosecution had no eyewitnesses or murder weapon. Despite the defense's arguments, Scott never testified in his own defense.
On November 12, 2004, after 7 days of deliberation, the jury convicted Scott Peterson of first-degree murder for Laci, second-degree murder for Connor. 1 month later, the jury recommended the death penalty, which the judge upheld. Scott was sentenced to death in March 2005 and sent to San Quentin State Prison.
Scott Peterson spent years appealing his conviction and death sentence. The California Supreme Court overturned Scott's death sentence in August of 2020, citing improper jury selection. However, his murder convictions were upheld. In December 2021, Scott was resentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His lawyers argued that a juror had failed to disclose her personal history as a domestic violence survivor. The court reviewed the claim, but ultimately upheld his conviction in 2023. Scott was moved from death row at San Quentin to Mule Creek State Prison in California, where he is currently serving his life sentence.
Myrene, this is a case that you chose. What is your primary interest in this case? What about this stuck out to you? What did you want to examine about this specific case?
As a prosecutor, this is one of those cases where they didn't have direct evidence. There wasn't a smoking gun or a bloody knife or any of those other types of things. We still don't know how Laci died. But what caught the attention was everything the defense tried to make it that it was not. They tried to say that the only reason the public and ultimately the jury turned on Scott and found him guilty was because of the media frenzy. No, that's not true. There was evidence. They tried to say that there were all these other nefarious things that could happen and that they wanted you to overlook all of the lies and the manipulation that Scott told everybody in this case, not just the family, Laci's and his, not just the police, not just the girlfriend, Amber Fry, but every single person he came in contact with. Now, because he's a liar doesn't mean he's necessarily a murderer, but you can look at his behavior, and you have to look at his behavior. And so I think what caught the attention on this was all of that, but then you had this beautiful young lady with the biggest smile and the biggest dimples who was 8.5 months pregnant. And she never got to become that mother. She never got to give birth to her son and hold him. And those options were taken away from her for a selfish claim by her husband because he didn't want to be a father. You know, there's a lot of other reasons, a lot of other ways he could have went about that. They could have gotten a divorce. He could have done a lot of things, but killing her was not something that needed to be done. And I guess as a prosecutor, one of the reasons I looked at this so strongly is I want to make people understand that sometimes you don't have the smoking gun or the independent eyewitness who saw it all happen. Yet as a prosecutor, it is still possible to put the pieces of the puzzle together and solve the crime. And that's what they did in this case.
In your opinion, why does someone, and of course it's hard to answer this, but why doesn't he just leave her? I get that she's pregnant and that's frowned upon, but those types of things happen all the time. Why would you go so far as to murder your wife and your unborn son instead of just leaving?
You know, that's a hard question to answer, but I think you have to look at the history of Scott Peterson, and he was a bit of a narcissist. Everything was always about him. He was very charming, and he was very charismatic, and he cared a great deal about what people thought of him in the beginning, or at least that's what I could glean from everything that I saw and everything that I've read. And I have watched multiple documentaries on this. I've read pretty much every article I could find on this case. And I think you have to go back to the beginning. You know, when he met Laci, she was 19, Scott was 22. They were in college. And, you know, at first glance, their first date, he did something incredibly thoughtful, which was he brought 2 dozen roses when he came to pick up Laci that day. 1 dozen for her and 1 dozen for her mother. Now, I haven't heard that done very often, and that's a really, great move if you mean it. But then when you look at some of the other stuff he's done along the way, it's hard not to look at that as, some manipulation. He wanted everybody to like him. He wanted everybody to think he was this great guy with the perfect wife and the perfect life. And they had a nice little home in Modesto, with a swimming pool and the perfect dog and all of these things. He didn't want to be the guy that ruined that. He didn't want that to be his legacy. And sometimes that's a powerful motivator.
That's quite the motivator. I mean, to be that worried about your image and then to murder your wife and unborn child, like there's nothing worse for your image than to be labeled as someone that's that type of monster.
But I think he thought he was smart enough to get away with it. I think he thought he could pull it off. One of the other things I uncovered was that while in college, Scott thought he was going to become a famous pro golfer. That was his plan. And then the relationship with Laci got serious. And somehow along the way, whether he had nudging in this area or he came to the realization on his own, he needed to be able to support a family. So he had to abandon that pro golfer idea. Maybe that's something that stuck with him. I mean, who knows? But he certainly wasn't fully committed to Laci within just a year maybe of their marriage. He had his first documented affair.
Yeah, 98.
Right? So he wasn't, that committed to her or the marriage or the relationship to not seek out an extramarital affair. But one of the things I also saw was that he really didn't want to be a father, and Laci was pregnant and she seemed very happy about it. But he had told family in 2001 and very early in 2002 that he was hoping for infertility so they wouldn't have to have kids. That's something when you hear that statement. That's what he's hoping for, is infertility.
I mean, it's something, especially in a world where vasectomies exist. Like, if you want infertility, go get some. Like, go
Right.
get a vasectomy, and then you don't have to worry about getting your wife pregnant.
This was a couple that were living the American dream. Like I said, they had this nice house in Modesto and, a seemingly really good life, but they were also about 20,000 or more in credit card debt. And here comes an unwanted baby he didn't want. And, this could be, just nothing, but he also had a $250,000 life insurance policy on Laci. I don't know about you, but when I was that young and not making a lot of money and I had, student loan debts, I didn't have life insurance then because I couldn't afford it.
Yeah.
But he had all of that in place. Now, it could be innocent or it can be part of the circumstantial mountain of evidence when you put it all together.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it is rare for people to get life insurance that young, although I laugh. And if someone's watching the video, it's like, well, why are you laughing when that was said? It's because me and Christina, my wife, we got life insurance. We have life insurance since we were in our mid-20s for me, early 20s for her. We're 3 years apart. So, I mean, we've had that for a while. But I hear what you're saying. All of these things, like adding up together, it's very, very shady. In addition to Scott's like cheating and his lying, what else about him makes you think this guy's absolutely guilty, even though we don't have much evidence outside of circumstantial evidence?
Well, before you get to all the other evidence, I do think you have to look at some of the things he lied about, right? Like, we know he had an affair, okay? Having an affair makes you a jerk. It doesn't necessarily make you a murderer. But he met Amber Frey in early to mid-November of 2002. He told her he was single at first. And then by December 9th, I believe it was, he told her he was a widower and that this would be his first Christmas without his wife. That sounds like premeditation to me. He's going to make sure his wife is no longer around, right?
It does.
So you have to look at what he said and how he did it.
But how dumb can you be? Like, did he really think that he was, or maybe to your point, he's a narcissist and he just thought he was going to be able to manipulate Amber and she would just go along with whatever he would say. But to make a statement like that he was a widower, and then to very shortly after that murder his wife, like, man, how did you not expect that to come back to haunt you?
Well, he was charismatic and he thought people would believe everything he said. I mean, what other reason would he tell her he was a widower? He could have just stuck with, hey, I'm single, living the single life. This is great.
True.
But he wanted
Exactly.
to evoke sympathy. He wanted to evoke some emotion from her where he, for lack of a better phrase, and I hate to use it because he claims he went fishing, but as a hook, to hook her in, to get her to feed into this story he was giving and make her just want to be with him. Maybe he was that kind of narcissist where he craved people wanting to be around him. That could be too.
It absolutely could be. You said it, and some of the articles say it, and do you actually think he was charismatic? From all of the clips that I've seen, he seems very awkward to me. He does not seem charismatic. But people keep using that term.
So in the beginning, this is a couple that, have beauty on their side, let's just say, right? Laci was beautiful. Like I said earlier, the big smile, the big dimples, just adorable, right? And he was very handsome. He was very handsome. He was in good shape, good athletic shape. And so people look at that as someone who, wow, someone like that doesn't need to do this kind of stuff, doesn't need to have criminal behavior. He's got everything he can. I think early on in the investigation, he tried to be charismatic and he tried to be the likable guy. But the more his lies built up, that was harder for him. And I agree. The one interview he did, I think it was with Diane Sawyer, he laughed at the most inappropriate parts of that. He just had the weirdest expressions. I don't think he was charismatic at all anymore.
It was like uncomfortable almost.
Yeah, I think he's been out of practice because he hadn't really talked to anybody or given a lot of interviews over the time he's been in prison.
Mm.
But leading up to this, I mean, even her family said in the beginning, they did not believe he was involved and stood by his side when police were looking at him. They said absolutely not. And the only thing that changed for the family initially was when Amber came forward and said, hey, this is what's been going on. And, one of the things that stuck with me on this case, so, throughout this case in 2002, and every time they replay snippets or documentaries or anything on this case, they show that picture of Laci, and I'm sure we have all seen it. She's sitting in a chair with her hands across her very pregnant belly. She's wearing a really pretty burgundy, like satin pantsuit. And she's sitting in a chair at her friend's annual Christmas party, the one she and Scott always went to together. But this time he was out of town and couldn't accompany her. She's 8.5 months pregnant. She really didn't feel like going, according to her friends, but they convinced her it was good to go. It would be good for her to get out and do that while Scott's out of town. Meanwhile, the same day, on December 14th, 2002, Scott is photographed with Amber in Fresno, California, at a Christmas party for her. How heartbreaking. You've got this beautiful pregnant wife waiting for you to go to this party with all of your friends, and he's off, gallivanting around with a girlfriend.
Yeah. I guess even that situation just lends support to the thought that, see, you're in public, you don't care about being photographed, like with your mistress. Why don't you just go live that life? Why do you have to kill your wife and baby? It's just, and I guess people don't always make the most rational decisions once they get into that state of mind. And I guess this also brings up another fact. I mean, do you think this is something that happened in the heat of the moment, or do you genuinely think it was something that was premeditated? I know that you said that him talking to Amber and saying that he was a widower shows that it was somewhat premeditated. Do you really believe that, or do you believe that he was just saying that for sympathy and then just circumstantially got into a position? Because we don't know how she died. We don't know what she was killed with. We have no idea. So is it possible that it happened in the heat of the moment, that it wasn't necessarily something that was premeditated?
Absolutely not. It was premeditated. And there's so much mounting evidence. I think the prosecution called it overwhelming amounts of evidence that he put together. All the things he did before she went missing, all the lies that he put forth, all of the preparation that he did, all leads to one conclusion and only one conclusion. This was premeditated. He was getting rid of Laci. He didn't want to be a dad. He didn't want to be a husband. And the only way out he saw was murder.
So not a vasectomy, not a divorce.
Nope.
Not moving. Murder.
Well, think about it. Even if they divorced, he would have had to pay child support, right?
Yeah.
And he was the only one that had a full-time job. So maybe he would have had to pay alimony too. They were $20,000 or more in debt. That's not going to leave him with a whole lot of money to spend on girlfriends or to go places and do things. So that could have been a factor for him too. Yeah, he could have gotten a divorce, but financially, that would have been maybe that he thought that would have ruined him.
Yeah, and he wanted to cash in on that $250,000 in life insurance.
There were numerous vigils and rallies and search parties that were done by friends and family of Laci, by law enforcement. And at a lot of those, Scott was on the phone with Amber or calling Amber. He wasn't the concerned husband worried about, are we going to find my wife or is she still alive? He was worried about, how is he going to spin his absence from his girlfriend, or when can he see her again, or how much he loves her? I mean, that takes a special kind of personality. And by special, I mean horrific, not in a good way, right? Your wife is missing. She's pregnant with your child, and you're more worried about setting up your next rendezvous? Really?
And isn't it weird? Why did he say he was in Paris and that the noise in the background at the vigil was people at the Eiffel Tower? Like that's so strange.
On New Year's Eve, and he was actually at the candlelight vigil for Laci, and her supporters and people were in the background making noise, and they were emotional and crying and upset, and he spun that to say that's where he was. But he also had to come up with a reason why he couldn't be with her on New Year's Eve. It would have looked awfully suspicious if he didn't go to that vigil for Laci on that holiday, right?
Yeah.
So he couldn't have gone with Amber. He couldn't have gone out to a party then. So he had to make something up. But that wasn't, the only series of lies he told her. It wasn't the only series of things that he pretended to act like it mattered to him.
Because then he also lied about his plans on Christmas Eve, because he said that he was going to go golfing, and then he said that he changed and decided to go fishing because of the weather, like it was too cold or something.
Yeah, I'm going to give you my professional legal opinion on that. I call bullshit.
Yeah.
Because he said that it was too cold to go golfing. And so detectives asked him, so you decided to go fishing? And he said yes. And they said in, 40-degree weather with wind on the San Francisco Bay.
It's just so
somehow
bad.
That was going to be warmer.
Yeah, so you'd be way colder. It'd be horrible. But obviously he didn't remember how cold it can get on the water because he hadn't been fishing in like a decade.
Yeah, this wasn't something he loved to do. It wasn't like this guy is a fisherman who goes out all the time and knows all the things, right? He just didn't. And, he changed his story a couple times when he went and looked at a couple neighbors' houses to see if Laci was there initially after she went missing. He told those neighbors that he went golfing. He forgot which lie he was telling and to whom. So, that is incredibly suspicious. You don't just forget that. If your significant other, if your pregnant wife goes missing, you're going to know, damn it, I was not there for her. I was fishing on the bay. You're not going to inadvertently say, oops, I meant I was golfing. No, where was I? I don't know.
It's a pretty bad lie. And then to have just gotten the fishing boat a couple weeks before, or a week before she goes missing, right? He had just gotten the fishing license. Was it the day she went missing he got the license?
Yeah, so he bought the boat on December 9th and tucked it away in his warehouse that he used as a fertilizer salesman. So her family said she never knew that he got a boat. And think about it, they're that far in debt. Christmas is coming and your wife is pregnant. You're really going to go out and splurge on a fishing boat? That seems rather odd. But he did just buy a 2-day fishing pass, only good for December 23rd and December 24th. To go fishing. Now, why would you buy that fishing pass if you claimed you were going to go golfing, but then changed your mind because it was too cold? You would have never bought the fishing pass to begin with.
Yes.
And if you're going to be an avid fisherman with a brand new boat, why wouldn't you buy
an annual pass, of course,
or a season's pass, or some kind of longer than just 2 days?
And then why choose to go, what was it, 90 miles away? Like, he had to pass like numerous bodies of water, like substantial bodies of water that could have been fished to go to this specific place.
Yeah, 90 miles away to the San Francisco Bay, and he missed other places that would have been closer. Because think about it, what if Laci had gone into early labor? Wouldn't you want to stay close to home to make sure that you're around if something like that happened?
I mean, it's just, it's everything adding up together. Like, if you take one or two of these things, I understand why people could be like, oh, well, people spend, yeah, they're $20,000 in credit card debt. But for some people, $20,000 in credit card debt is not a lot of credit card debt. And, and they have poor spending habits, but then you tie that with the lies and the mistress and mixing up golfing and fishing. And then, I mean, we haven't even talked about, some of the evidence that was found, like on the boat, like the hair in the pliers, or the fishing hooks that he had made in his garage, right?
Yeah, one of my favorite quotes from one of the documentaries that I saw was, when law enforcement was getting a little suspicious of his story, was he going golfing? Was he going fishing because it was too cold to golf? They asked him, they said, what are you fishing for? He couldn't answer them. They furthered it and said, well, what kind of bait were you using? And he couldn't answer that either. If you just came back from fishing, wouldn't you know exactly what kind of bait you were using, number one, and what you were trying to catch, number two? I mean, I'm not a fisherman, but I think I would know at least a couple of those answers. And so when they asked him that and he couldn't answer, I think they were at his house, and he walked out of the room that they were in, and they could hear him muttering, fuck, to himself. Like he just got caught in a lie and he couldn't keep his lies straight.
Which was obviously the case, because he did a terrible, terrible job. Keeping his lies straight. But despite that, the Innocence Project is it specifically the Los Angeles Innocence Project?
Yes.
Believes that his case deserves another look. Why do you think that is?
Well, they're entitled to be wrong, in my opinion. But
let us know how you really feel, Myrene.
I feel really strongly about this case. I really do. One of the things that people descended on, those who believe in his innocence, said the media frenzy on this case really descended on everything. You had this beautiful pregnant mom-to-be, this handsome husband living this California dream. Some say, including some in the Innocence Project, that it was a media spectacle that convicted him. But one of the best quotes I heard was, "A media circus does not a false confession or false conviction make."
Yeah.
A media circus can't make him lie and can't make him get caught in his web of lies and can't make a mistress come out of the woodwork and can't make all of this other evidence we're going to talk about eventually materialize. Yes, there was a lot of media focused on this case. It was truly high profile. But the investigation continued and turned over every stone and looked at everything, and the things, that the Innocence Project wanted to take a look at, in my opinion, and the opinion of the appellate court so far, wasn't enough to warrant a change in his conviction, to warrant overturning that appeal. It wasn't enough to do any of that. And while I can applaud them for taking a look at things, and I can understand as a prosecutor, I want to do everything right to the last second, every I dotted, every T crossed, to make sure it is the right way so that there isn't an appeal. This isn't the case to do that with. It just isn't.
I think that's a good place to close for this episode and continue talking about the Scott and Laci Peterson case in the next episode. Talk a little bit more about what evidence actually convicted Scott, and then talk about some of the other theories for people who potentially were involved in Laci's disappearance and murder.
So I think that's a good, segue and a teaser into our next episode, talking about what evidence actually convicted him. And yes, it was circumstantial, but it was overwhelming evidence, according to the prosecutors and law enforcement who worked on the case. And so to hear our analysis of that, you need to tune in to the next episode.
If you have any questions, we'd love to hear from you. Please message us on our Instagram page, or technically TikTok too. It's the same name, BTV_pod.
Let us know what you think. Let us know if you like it.
Please give us a rating if you don't mind. If you're enjoying the podcast, share it with a friend. Give us a 5-star rating. Leave us a comment. You can find us wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.